The smell hit Amiko Tanaka first. Not the charred cedar that had hung over Chiba like a funeral shroud for 3 weeks. Not the wet ash that coated every surface in the ruined warehouse district. This was different. This was the scent of a man who had stopped bathing, a man who had stopped caring, a man who had nothing left to lose. Kenji Matsuda's boot came through the cellar door with the sound of splintering wood and the end of hope. The torch in his hand painted the three women's faces in shades of orange and shadow. Amiko pressed her back against the cold concrete wall, her fingers white around the empty ceramic bowl she'd been clutching for the past 6 hours. Beside her, Yuki's breathing came in short, panicked gasps. Sachiko had gone completely still, the way a rabbit freezes when it knows the hawk has seen it. "Come out, little flowers," Kenji called down into the darkness. His voice was rough, scraped raw by homemade shochu and cigarettes rolled from newspaper. "The Americans will be here by sunset. Do you want to be meat for the blue-eyed dogs, or do you want to give what you have to your brothers?" Amiko's mind raced through her choices. Die here at the hands of desperate Japanese men who had once been teachers and dock workers and fathers. Die later at the hands of the American devils who the radio said would do unspeakable things to Japanese women. Or somehow impossibly survive both. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know as Kenji's boots began their heavy descent down the cellar stairs, was that the devil climbing toward her in 30 seconds would smell like Kansas wheat fields, would have hands that trembled when they held a rifle, would carry in his pack a silver-wrapped rectangle of sweetness that would shatter 4 years of propaganda in a single moment. But first there would be blood. 3,000 miles away and 1 month earlier, Daniel Warren sat in the hayloft of his father's barn with a book of Walt Whitman poems open on his lap. His hands were shaking. They had been shaking for 3 days ever since the letter arrived from the War Department. In 30 days, he would be on a ship to Japan. In 45 days, he might be dead. And he had never even kissed a girl. The barn smelled like it always had. Hay and motor oil and the sweet rot of last year's corn silage. Normal smells. American smells. The kind of smells you don't think about until you know you might never smell them again. Daniel ran his finger along the page, reading the same line for the 5th time. "I celebrate myself and sing myself." The words felt hollow. How could he celebrate himself when he was terrified of what he was about to become? "Daniel," his father's voice carried across the wheat field from the house. "Stop reading that sissy poetry and help me with the thresher." Daniel closed the book. His father had served in the Great War, had come back with a metal plate in his skull and a conviction that his son was too soft for the world, too bookish, too gentle. The kind of boy who cried when they butchered chickens. The kind of boy who would get himself killed in combat because he hesitated at the wrong moment. Maybe his father was right. The training camp at Fort Shelby had done its best to turn Daniel into something harder. The instructors showed them films. Grainy black and white footage of Japanese soldiers charging American positions with bayonets and screams, bodies hanging from trees, prisoners being executed. The narrator's voice was calm and authoritative. The Japanese soldier never surrenders. He will fight to the death. He has been taught that capture is the ultimate dishonor. Expect no mercy, show no mercy. Then came the films about the women. Daniel had wanted to look away, but the sergeant walked between the rows of seated recruits, watching for any sign of weakness. On screen, a Japanese woman in a kimono smiled at an American soldier. The next frame showed a grenade explosion. The narrator's voice again. "The enemy uses their women as weapons. Comfort girls hide explosives. Geishas carry poison. In Japan, nothing is what it seems. Trust nothing. Trust no one." Daniel had vomited over the side of the transport ship 3 times during the voyage across the Pacific. The other men assumed it was seasickness. Only Daniel knew it was terror. Pure, paralyzing terror at what he was being asked to do, at what he was being asked to become. Corporal Frank Hayes had found him on the 3rd night leaning over the rail in the darkness. Hayes was 32, ancient by the standards of the young privates. He had seen combat at Iwo Jima, and his eyes had the flat, distant look of a man who had watched friends die. He offered Daniel a cigarette without a word. Daniel took it even though he didn't smoke. "First deployment?" Hayes asked. Daniel nodded. "You'll be fine. Just remember what they taught you. Keep your head down. Follow orders. And don't trust the locals, any of them. I've seen what they're capable of. There was something in Hayes's voice, a weight, a darkness that Daniel didn't understand but could feel pressing down on both of them in the salt-heavy air. Hayes flicked his cigarette into the black water below and walked away without another word. Daniel watched the orange ember fall and disappear into the Pacific. He wondered if that's what it would be like. A brief light, then nothing. 3 weeks earlier in Chiba, Emiko had been teaching kanji to 12 children in a schoolhouse that was missing half its roof. The B-29s had come through a month before turning the summer night into an inferno. Her father, Principal Tanaka, had died trying to save the school's records. They found him in the office, arms wrapped around a filing cabinet full of student files burned beyond recognition. Her mother had gone to Hiroshima 2 weeks before the surrender to care for her sister. She came back changed. The skin on her hands was wrong somehow, loose and papery. She could barely keep food down. The doctor had no name for what was wrong with her, only a quiet suggestion that Emiko should prepare herself. Takeshi, her 14-year-old brother, weighed 38 kilograms. His ribs stood out like the slats of a broken fence. The family's rice ration had been cut twice in the past month. There was talk that the war was almost over, but hunger didn't care about politics or surrender. Takeshi was going to starve to death in less than 2 weeks unless something changed. The government recruiter arrived on a Tuesday. He wore a clean uniform, which was remarkable in itself. Everyone else in Chiba looked like they'd been dipped in ash and wrung out to dry. He stood at the front of the classroom and waited for Emiko to dismiss the children. She did, even though they had nowhere to go except back to homes that were mostly rubble and hunger. "Miss Tanaka," the recruiter said. His voice was soft, almost kind. "I knew your father. He was a good man, a patriot." Emiko bowed. She didn't trust herself to speak. "We are establishing special recreation centers," he continued, "for when the Americans arrive. We need educated women, women who can speak some English, women whose families have served the emperor." He paused. "Women whose families need ration cards." The words hung in the air between them. Emiko understood immediately what he wasn't saying directly. What he couldn't say directly, because to name it would be to admit what the government was doing. "You would be a patriotic shield daughter," the recruiter said. "Your sacrifice would protect thousands of pure Japanese women from the beasts, from what the Americans will do when they arrive." Emiko looked past him at the charred remains of the schoolhouse, at the empty desks where children who were now orphans used to sit, at the place where her father had died trying to save something, anything from the flames. "My brother," she said quietly, "he needs food." "Your family will receive full rations," the recruiter replied, effective immediately. That evening, Emiko's mother signed the consent form with trembling hands that could barely hold the pen. Takeshi didn't understand why his sister was crying. He was too hungry to understand much of anything except the small ball of rice Emiko gave him from the emergency ration the recruiter had provided. He ate it in 4 bites and fell asleep with a faint smile on his face. The first smile Emiko had seen from him in weeks. Before she left the next morning, Emiko placed a white chrysanthemum on her father's memorial tablet. She wondered if he would be proud or ashamed. She decided it didn't matter. The dead had the luxury of judgment. The living only had the burden of survival. The Chiba Recreation Center was a converted warehouse near the docks. Emiko arrived with 11 other women ages 18 to 25. The building was surprisingly intact. More surprisingly, it was stocked. Rice, soap, bandages, medical supplies. A luxury of resources that seemed impossible in a nation that was starving. In the corner of the main room sat a wooden crate, perhaps a meter square, nailed firmly shut. Japanese military markings covered the sides. Emiko could read some of the characters. Medical, emergency, do not open. The matron who met them was a hard-faced woman in her 50s who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. When the Americans arrive, she told them without preamble, "You will service them. This is your duty. This protects other Japanese women from what they would do otherwise. The crate contains emergency medical supplies. You will not open it unless absolutely necessary. Do you understand?" 12 heads nodded in unison. Emiko was assigned a sleeping mat next to 2 other women. Yuki was 19, a fisherman's daughter from the coast with quick hands and an angry mouth. "We're cattle," she hissed that first night, "sacrificed so the rich girls in Tokyo can stay pure." Sachiko was 23, a widow. Her husband had been a kamikaze pilot who crashed his plane into an American ship at Okinawa 4 months earlier. She carried his photograph everywhere wrapped in a silk cloth. "I'll be with him soon anyway," she said flatly. "This is just the wait before I can join him." Emiko tried to find hope in their situation and failed. She focused instead on the practical, learning the routine, memorizing where the supplies were kept, studying the few English phrases the matron made them practice. "Hello, yes, thank you," words that tasted like ash in her mouth. On August 15th, they gathered around a crackling radio to hear the Emperor's voice for the first time in their lives. The transmission was poor. The words were formal, archaic, almost impossible to understand, but the meaning came through. "We have resolved to endure the unendurable and bear the unbearable." The war was over. Within an hour, the matron was gone. She left without a word, without instructions, simply vanished into the chaos of a nation that had just admitted defeat. The police who had been stationed nearby disappeared the same day. By the second day, they heard gunshots in the ruins. Not rifle fire, pistols, the sound of small, personal violence. 6 of the 12 women fled on the third day. They took what food they could carry and headed for the mountains, hoping to find family, or at least a place to hide. Emiko, Yuki, and Sachiko stayed, partly because they had nowhere else to go, partly because of the supplies, and partly, though none of them would say it out loud, because they were too tired to run. The bandits came on the 5th day. Not soldiers, not police, just men. Deserters and black marketeers and dock workers who had decided that in the absence of law might made right. They circled the warehouse like wolves, calling out, making promises and threats in equal measure, testing the doors, counting the women inside. Emiko recognized one of their voices. Kenji Matsuda had been a schoolteacher before the war. He had studied English literature. She remembered him visiting her father's school once, discussing Wordsworth with the older students. "I wandered lonely as a cloud," he had recited, "that floats on high over vales and hills." Now his voice was rough and desperate and cruel. "We know you're in there, little flowers. We know what you have. Food, medicine, yourselves. The Americans are coming, but we're here first. You can give us what we want, or we can take it. Your choice." Yuki wanted to fight. She found a piece of rebar in the rubble and gripped it with white knuckles. Sachiko seemed almost relieved, like this was the ending she'd been waiting for. Emiko made them move to the cellar, a concrete hole beneath the warehouse floor that smelled of mold and old seawater. They took what they could carry: the rice, some bandages, the mysterious sealed crate that Emiko dragged down the stairs because it felt important, even though she didn't know why. They waited in the dark. Hours passed. The voices outside grew louder, more aggressive. Then came the sound of boots on the floor above. Heavy, deliberate, coming closer. That's when the door splintered. When Kenji's torch lit up their faces. When Emiko realized that the devils she'd been taught to fear might not be the ones who spoke English. Kenji descended the stairs slowly. Behind him, 2 other men. Emiko recognized one. Ichiro, a former Imperial Army sergeant who had deserted when the surrender came through. The other was younger, maybe 20, with eyes that darted around the cellar like a rat looking for an escape route. "Emiko Tanaka," Kenji said, and there was something terrible in the way he said her name. Recognition, memory of better days, and the complete absence of mercy. "Your father taught me English. He was a good man. He would be ashamed to see you here. Ashamed of what you've become." "We didn't choose this," Emiko said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "None of us chose this," Kenji replied. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the alcohol on his breath. "My wife burned to death in the firebombing. My daughter is starving. I need what's in this room. The supplies, the food, and yes, you, all of you. You're already ruined, already defiled by your own government's plans. You might as well serve Japanese men before the Americans get here." From the shadows behind him, a small figure emerged. A girl perhaps 8 years old, wearing a coat far too large for her. She was thin in the way that suggested weeks of malnutrition. Her eyes were huge in her small face. "Haruka," Kenji said without turning around. "This is what survival looks like. This is what I have to do to keep you alive. Watch and learn." Emiko looked at the child and saw herself. saw every Japanese girl who had been told that her body was a weapon for the empire, a shield for others, a sacrifice necessary for the greater good. The anger that rose in her throat tasted like copper and smoke. Kenji reached for her wrist. His fingers closed around it like an iron band. Amiko tried to pull away, but he was far stronger. Yuki screamed and threw the piece of concrete she'd been holding. It missed, shattering against the wall with a crack like thunder in the confined space. The sound echoed up through the warehouse, up through the skeletal remains of the building, up into the gray morning air, where it mixed with the rumble of a dying Jeep engine 400 yards away. Private Daniel Warren heard the scream and froze. Corporal Hayes heard it and swore. They had taken a wrong turn an hour ago, trying to find their way back to the main convoy route. The Jeep's radiator was failing, steam pouring from under the hood in white clouds that smelled like hot metal and antifreeze. Could be a trap, Hayes said, his hand moving automatically to his Thompson submachine gun. They use the women to draw you in. Then the grenades come out. Daniel looked around at the ruins of Chiba, at the skeletal buildings and the ash-covered streets, at the complete and utter absence of the fanatic resistance they'd been promised. Where were the bonsai charges? Where were the suicide bombers? Where were the soldiers who would never surrender? All he saw was a starving dog gnawing on what looked like a piece of leather, a child's shoe half buried in the ash small enough to fit a toddler, the ghost of a civilization that had been burned down to bedrock and below. What if it's real? Daniel asked. Hayes looked at him with those flat, distant eyes. Then it's not our problem. We're scouts, not rescue. We find the convoy, we report, we stay alive. That's the mission. The scream came again, higher pitched, more desperate. Daniel was moving before he made a conscious decision to move. His boots hit the cracked pavement with heavy thuds. Hayes shouted something behind him, but the words were lost in the blood pounding in Daniel's ears. He ran toward the warehouse, his M1 Garand held at high port, his breath coming in ragged gasps that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with terror. He didn't know what he would find. He didn't know if he would have the courage to pull the trigger if it came to that. He only knew that the sound of that scream had shattered something in him, some carefully constructed wall between the propaganda and the reality, between the enemy and the human. The warehouse entrance was a jagged hole in a concrete wall. Daniel stepped through it, and his eyes struggled to adjust to the gloom. For a moment, all he could see were shadows. Then the torchlight resolved into shapes. 3 men in tattered Japanese uniforms. 3 women huddled against the far wall. One of the men holding a pistol. One of the women in his grip. Daniel raised his rifle. His finger found the trigger. His finger trembled on the metal. The men turned toward him, and in the flickering light of the torch, he must have looked exactly like what the propaganda promised. A devil in a steel helmet. A blue-eyed monster come to devour them all. "Drop it!" Daniel shouted. His voice cracked on the second word. "Get away from them." The man with the pistol, the one holding the woman, froze. Then slowly, deliberately, he shifted his grip, pulled the woman in front of him like a shield, leveled his Nambu pistol at Daniel's chest. The standoff hung in the air like smoke. Daniel could see every detail with terrible clarity. The sweat on the man's forehead. The woman's face pale as bone, her eyes locked onto his. She wasn't looking at him with hatred. She was looking at him with a question, a plea, a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, the monster she'd been taught to fear was something different. Behind Daniel, boots pounded on concrete. Hayes burst through the entrance, Thompson up and ready. "Warren, get your damn head down." The other bandits scattered, not because they were brave, not because they were cowards, but because the situation had changed and survival meant reassessment. The man with the pistol, the one Daniel would later learn was named Kenji Matsuda, looked from Daniel to Hayes and back again, looked at his daughter watching from the shadows, made a calculation that only desperate fathers understand. He shoved the woman forward, hard. She stumbled, her knees hitting the dirt and broken glass of the warehouse floor. Kenji and his men bolted for a hole in the rear wall, disappearing into the maze of ruined buildings beyond. Hayes fired a short burst over their heads. A warning, a reminder that mercy had limits. Then silence. The kind of silence that follows violence. Heavy and ringing and full of everything that didn't happen but could have. Daniel slowly lowered his rifle. His whole body was shaking now. The adrenaline was draining out of him and leaving behind something that felt like nausea and relief in equal measure. He looked at the 3 women. They hadn't moved. They were waiting to see what the devils would do now that they had won. The woman he'd seen in Kenji's grip was staring at him. She was young, maybe his age, skin and bones beneath a torn kimono. Her hair was matted with ash and grease, but there was something in her eyes. Intelligence, determination, a refusal to break even when everything around her had shattered. Daniel reached into his webbing. His fingers found the rectangular shape he was looking for. He pulled out a Hershey bar, the silver foil catching the dim light like a promise. He had been saving it. For what he didn't know. A celebration maybe, or a last meal before combat, or just a reminder that somewhere far away there was still sweetness in the world. He tore open the wrapper. The sound was loud in the silence. A crinkle of foil that seemed impossibly cheerful given the circumstances. The smell of chocolate filled the warehouse. Rich and dark and so completely foreign to everything around them that it might as well have been perfume from another planet. Daniel knelt down, slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. He broke off a square of chocolate and held it out on his open palm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, even though he knew she couldn't understand the words. "Look, food." The woman's hand hovered over his palm. Daniel could see it trembling, could see the war happening behind her eyes. Every piece of propaganda she'd been fed, every story about American brutality, every reason to believe this was poison or a trick or a prelude to something worse. Then a small figure darted forward. The child, Kenji's daughter. She snatched the chocolate from Daniel's hand and shoved it into her mouth before anyone could stop her. Her eyes went wide. For a moment, nothing. Then her face transformed. A smile. The first real smile Daniel had seen since arriving in Japan. The child spoke a single word in Japanese. He didn't understand it, but he understood the tone. Delight, wonder, joy. The woman took the second piece Daniel offered. She placed it on her tongue and closed her eyes. Tears began to stream down her cheeks. Not tears of fear, tears of something else. Something that Daniel didn't have words for, but could feel in his own chest. The overwhelming weight of beauty in the midst of ashes, of kindness where only cruelty was expected, of humanity surviving in the spaces between the propaganda and the war. She broke the remaining chocolate into pieces and shared them with the other two women. All three of them were crying now. Hayes stood in the doorway, his Thompson lowered, watching the scene with an expression Daniel couldn't read. "We can't leave them here, Hayes," Daniel said quietly. "Those men will come back." "They're the enemy, Warren," Hayes replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "We have orders." "They're people," Daniel said, "and they're starving. Look at them." Hayes walked over to the crate the women had dragged into the cellar. He kicked at it. The wood was solid, but the nails were old. He used the butt of his Thompson to pry at the lid. It gave way with a scream of metal on wood. The contents spilled across the floor. Bars of soap, rolls of bandages, bottles of rubbing alcohol, and underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, something that made Hayes go very still. "Christ," he breathed. He held up one of the packages. Even in the dim light, Daniel could read the kanji characters. Medical, pregnancy, testing. The woman saw it too. Her face went white. She turned away and was sick against the wall. The reality of what she had been prepared for, what the government had expected her to survive, laid bare in sterile medical equipment. Outside, a whistle echoed through the ruins, long and shrill, then two short blasts in response. The bandits were regrouping, calling reinforcements. The peace wouldn't last. "We go," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. Now, he helped the woman to her feet. She didn't pull away. She was too exhausted, too overwhelmed. But her eyes met his, and in that moment, something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but the first fragile possibility of it. The first crack in the wall of lies they'd both been fed. Hayes grabbed what supplies he could carry. "This is going to get us court-martialed, Warren." "Then they can have my stripes," Daniel replied. "I didn't cross the Pacific to leave people to die at the hands of their own countrymen." They loaded the three women and the child into the Jeep. It was already overloaded. The engine was still failing. They had 3 miles of hostile territory between them and safety. But as Daniel looked back at the warehouse, at the place where monsters were supposed to meet, and instead found each other's humanity, he knew with absolute certainty that this was the only choice he could live with. The Jeep lurched forward, engine coughing. Behind them, figures emerged from the ruins. Kenji and his men watching them go. Daniel met Kenji's eyes in the rearview mirror. There was something in that look. Not hatred, not gratitude, just a kind of weary recognition. Two men doing what they thought they had to do to protect the people they cared about. Two men discovering that the real enemy wasn't across enemy lines. It was the lie that convinced them to draw those lines in the first place. The woman was sitting in the back of the Jeep, clutching the medical crate. The child had fallen asleep in her lap, face still sticky with chocolate. The woman looked at Daniel and spoke. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. A question. Perhaps her name. Perhaps something else. Daniel, he said, pointing to himself. Daniel Warren. The woman nodded, pointed to herself. Emiko, then to the others. Yuki, Sachiko. Names, not enemies, not statistics, not propaganda. People with names and faces and lives that had been broken by forces far beyond their control. As the Jeep rattled through the ruins of Chiba, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. It lit up the destruction in shades of gold and shadow. Behind them, the warehouse district faded into smoke and memory. Ahead of them, 3 miles of unknown danger and the faint hope of something better. In Daniel's pocket, wrapped in silver foil, was the half of the Hershey bar he hadn't given away. In Emiko's hand, clutched like a lifeline, was the torn piece of chocolate wrapper she had saved. Two people from opposite sides of the war, brought together by circumstances, neither had chosen holding on to the fragile evidence that sometimes mercy defeats propaganda. That sometimes kindness is the bravest act of all. That sometimes the real victory isn't in destroying your enemy, but in refusing to believe they were ever your enemy in the first place. The Jeep's engine coughed again, and in the uncertain morning light of defeated Japan, 5 people, who by all rights should have been enemies, drove together toward an uncertain future, bound together by chocolate and soap, and the radical idea that humanity might survive even the most savage of wars. The Jeep made it exactly 2 miles before physics and warfare conspired against them. The radiator had been weeping steam for the past 20 minutes, leaving a trail of white vapor through the ash-covered streets like breadcrumbs for anyone who cared to follow. Hayes wrestled with the steering wheel as the vehicle lurched over rubble that had once been someone's home, someone's shop, someone's life. In the back, Emiko held Haruka against her chest, one arm wrapped protectively around the sleeping child. Yuki and Sachiko pressed close on either side, 3 women and a little girl crammed into a space designed for cargo, not people. Every bounce sent them colliding into each other in the sharp edges of the medical crate. Nobody complained. Compared to the cellar, compared to Kenji's hands, compared to the certain violence they'd escaped, this discomfort was a luxury. Daniel kept looking back at them. He couldn't help it. Every time he turned around, Emiko's eyes were there watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Not gratitude exactly, something more complicated, something that made his chest feel tight and strange. Hayes noticed. Eyes forward, Warren. You're not a damn tour guide. A bullet spanged off the Jeep's frame. Just one. A wild shot from somewhere in the skeletal buildings to their left. Hayes didn't even flinch. They're testing our range, seeing if we'll engage. Should we, Daniel's hands tightened on his rifle, and waste ammunition on ghosts, keep moving? But Hayes's jaw was set in a way that suggested he was doing calculations Daniel didn't want to think about. Distance to safety, fuel remaining. The weight of 7 people in a vehicle meant 4-4. The Jeep hit a crater hidden beneath a layer of ash, and the sickening crack of metal on metal told them everything they needed to know before Hayes even said it. Axles gone. Everybody out. Now. They scrambled from the vehicle as it tilted violently to one side. Haruka woke with a cry of confusion. Emiko murmured something to her in Japanese soft words that transcended language. Comfort. Safety. The kind of lies mothers tell children when the world is ending. Tree line, Hayes barked, pointing to a stand of blackened pines about 50 yards away. Move. Yuki kicked off her wooden Geta sandals without hesitation, running barefoot through the mud and ash. Daniel tried to offer his hand to Sachiko, but she ignored it, her face set in that same resigned expression she'd worn since the warehouse. Only Emiko hesitated, looking back at the medical crate still in the Jeep. Leave it, Hayes said. No. Daniel was already pulling it free, his thin arms straining. The crate weighed at least 40 pounds. We might need it. It's evidence of what we just did, kid. It's proof we distributed military medical supplies to enemy nationals. It's soap and bandages. People are dying of infection out there. Hayes stared at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Something that looked almost like pain. You remind me of someone. Grab the damn crate. Let's go. They made it to the pines just as voices rose from the ruins behind them. Not shouting. Worse. The coordinated calls of men who hunt together. Who've done this before. Low whistles, short replies, the sound of a net closing. The grove offered concealment, but not much else. The trees had been burned in some earlier attack, their trunks blackened and skeletal. The ground was covered in a slick mixture of ash and yesterday's rain. Daniel set down the crate and immediately felt the weight of exhaustion hit him. He'd been running on adrenaline since the warehouse. Now that chemical fire was burning out, leaving behind the reality of his situation. He was 19 years old. He'd been in Japan for less than a week. He'd nearly shot a man. And now he was hiding in a burned forest with 3 Japanese women and a little girl while an unknown number of armed men hunted them. This wasn't what they'd shown him in the training films. Emiko settled Haruka against a tree trunk and then surprised everyone by speaking. Thank you. The English was heavily accented, but clear. You save us. Daniel's mouth fell open. You speak English. Little, I teach, before war. She gestured at herself, then at the others. We understand, you and Hayes, everything. How much is everything? Hayes asked quietly. Emiko looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke again, it was directed at Daniel, but her eyes never left Hayes. You say warehouse. You say we are people, not enemy. She paused. Hayes say Iwo Jima. Say nurses. Hayes went completely still, his face drained of color. What's she talking about? Daniel asked. For several seconds, Hayes didn't answer. He just stared at Emiko with an expression Daniel had never seen on the older man's face. Something raw and terrible and almost pleading. March of 45, Hayes finally said. His voice was barely above a whisper. Iwo Jima. Tommy Rodriguez and I cleared a cave system. Found 3 Japanese nurses inside. Unarmed. They had bandages, medical supplies. Tommy wanted to take them prisoner. Hayes's hands were shaking. I emptied my 45 into all 3 of them. Told myself they might have grenades, but they didn't. They only had bandages. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Tommy died 2 days later in a banzai charge. Last thing he said to me was, "Frank those nurses." He died thinking I was a monster. Hayes looked at Emiko. He was right. Emiko translated quietly to Yuki and Sachiko. Daniel watched their faces change as they understood. These weren't just random American soldiers. This was a man who had killed women like them, who had chosen violence when he could have chosen mercy. Yuki stood up, walked over to where Hayes sat with his back against a charred tree. She pulled out a cigarette, lit it with shaking hands, and offered it to him without a word. Hayes took it. His hand brushed hers. For just a moment, enemy and executioner, victim and victimizer sharing tobacco and silence, and something that might have been the beginning of forgiveness. The whistle came again, closer this time. Kenji's voice carried through the ruins. Americans, we don't want you. Just give us the women and the supplies. You can leave alive. Hayes looked at Daniel. Your call, kid. We can leave the crate. Maybe they'll settle for that. Daniel thought about the child sleeping against the tree, about Emiko's eyes meeting his over that piece of chocolate, about the photograph Sachiko carried of her dead husband, about all the propaganda that had told him these people were less than human, expendable, acceptable casualties. He stood up and opened the medical crate. Warren, what are you doing? Daniel started throwing bars of soap toward the voices in the ruins, heavy white rectangles that landed in the mud with soft thumps, then bandages, rolls of clean white gauze that unfurled like surrender flags, then bottles of rubbing alcohol that caught the weak sunlight. Take it, Daniel shouted. Take it and go. A figure emerged from behind a collapsed wall, Kenji Matsuda looking older and more tired than he had in the warehouse. His pistol was lowered. He stared at the supplies scattered across the ground between them. You're giving it to us. I'm giving you a choice, Daniel called back. You can take the medicine and help people, Or you can try to take the women, and I'll put a bullet in you. Kenji bent down slowly and picked up one of the soap bars. He turned it over in his hands, reading the English stamped into the surface. U.S. Army Medical Corps for humanitarian use. He started laughing. It was a broken sound half-sob. Humanitarian. We told our people you were demons. You were barbarians. You would eat our children. He held up the soap. You brought medicine. For us. My wife burned to death in your firebombing, Kenji continued. My daughter is starving because of your blockade. I've spent 4 years being told that Americans are the source of all evil. And here you are giving me soap to wash with, bandages to save lives with. He sat down in the mud. I was a teacher. I taught English literature to children. Wordsworth, Keats. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. That's Keats. Did you know that, American boy? No, sir, Daniel said. I taught 8-year-olds to read poetry in your language. And now I threaten girls I could have taught. Kenji looked back at the ruins where his men waited. What have we all become? Haruka appeared at the edge of the grove. Before anyone could stop her, she ran to her father. Papa, the American gave me chocolate. It was sweet, and he gave me water. Kenji caught his daughter and held her. Over her head, he looked at Daniel. Really looked at him. Not at the uniform or the rifle or the steel helmet. At the boy underneath, 19 years old and terrified and desperately trying to do the right thing in a situation where right and wrong had stopped meaning anything clear. You're a child yourself, Kenji said softly. Old enough to know I don't want to kill anyone, Daniel replied. Kenji stood lifting Haruka with him. He called out in Japanese and his men emerged from the ruins. 10 of them, maybe 12. All thin, all exhausted. All looking at the scattered medical supplies like they were water in a desert. Kenji gave an order. The men began gathering the soap and bandages with careful, almost reverent hands. Tell your generals, Kenji said in English as he walked away, that some of us remember mercy. Some of us remember what we were before the war made us into animals. Tell them that Kenji Matsuda, who taught their language to Japanese children, says thank you. He disappeared into the ruins at Haruka's small hand in his. Daniel sat down heavily. The adrenaline was gone. In its place was something that felt like grief and relief tangled together so tightly he couldn't separate them. He'd given away military supplies. He'd negotiated with the enemy. He'd probably violated 6 different regulations. And he didn't regret any of it. Hayes was watching him with an odd expression. You just ended a firefight with Soapworn. Seemed better than bullets. It was. Hayes lit another cigarette. It really was. Night fell while they waited in the grove. The temperature dropped, and the women began to shiver in their thin kimonos. Daniel took off his field jacket without thinking and offered it to Emiko. She hesitated, then wrapped it around her shoulders. The jacket was enormous on her small frame. She pulled it close and breathed in. Smell like tobacco, and wheat, and soap. Kansas soap, Daniel said. We make it different there. Kansas, Emiko tested the word. You are from Kansas. Born and raised, farm country, wheat fields as far as you can see. I would like to see wheat fields, someday. She said it like she was talking about visiting the moon, an impossible dream. Maybe you will, Daniel said, and then felt stupid for saying it. What was she going to do, immigrate to America, the country that had just firebombed her city and killed her father? The absurdity of it made him laugh, a short, bitter sound. Why you laugh? Because this is crazy, all of it. Yesterday I was on a ship being told you were my enemy. Today I'm sitting in a burned forest giving you my jacket. Propaganda is a powerful thing, Emiko said quietly. Make people see monsters where there is only people. Both sides. Japanese told we are superior. Americans told they are superior. Both lies. Just people. Scared people. Sachiko spoke in Japanese. Emiko translated. She asked if you were at Okinawa. Her husband died there. I wasn't, Daniel said, but Hayes was. Hayes heard his name. What? Sachiko's husband died at Okinawa. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke directly to Sachiko in halting, terrible Japanese. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. An apology, an acknowledgement, a recognition of shared loss. Sachiko pulled out the photograph of her husband, showed it to Hayes. A young man in a pilot's uniform smiling at the camera like he had his whole life ahead of him. Hayes looked at it for a long time. Then he reached into his own pocket and pulled out a photo. A different young man, different uniform, but the same smile, the same innocence. Tommy Rodriguez, Hayes said. My best friend, dead at Iwo Jima because I taught him that mercy was weakness. Yuki took the photographs, placed them side by side on her lap. Two dead boys who would never meet, would never know they'd be mourned by people who were supposed to be enemies. She said something in Japanese that Emiko didn't translate, but Daniel understood anyway from the tone. Waste. All of it. Waste. They shared the cigarettes Hayes had left, passed them around in silence. American soldier and Japanese comfort women, breathing the same smoke under the same stars, united by nothing more than the exhaustion of people who had survived when they shouldn't have. Daniel tried to teach Emiko a phrase in English. You're safe now. She repeated it carefully. You are safe now. Close enough. Daniel. She said his name like it was a foreign word, which it was. Why you help us? You could leave. Hayes say it. You could go. He didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he had too many answers. Because she'd looked at him with hope instead of hatred. Because Haruka had smiled at chocolate. Because his sister back in Kansas was the same age as Yuki, and he couldn't imagine leaving her to men like Kenji had been. Because every reason he had been given to hate Japanese people had shattered the moment he saw real fear in real eyes. Because it was the right thing to do, he finally said. It sounded inadequate, childish even, but Emiko nodded like she understood. In Japan, we say the nail that stands up gets hammered down. You stand up for us. Maybe you get hammered. Maybe, but I can live with that. What he couldn't live with, what would have kept him awake for the rest of his life, was walking away. A sound in the darkness. Not a whistle this time. Footsteps. Careful. Deliberate. Hayes grabbed his Thompson. Daniel raised his rifle. The women went very still. A figure emerged from the trees. Not Kenji. Younger. Harder. Ichiro, the former Imperial Army sergeant. He moved with the confidence of a man who'd killed before and would kill again. I didn't take the soap, he said in Japanese that Emiko translated in a whisper. I'm not interested in mercy. I'm interested in honor. Japanese honor. And these women, these comfort girls, they stole our honor by volunteering to serve you before you even arrived. We didn't volunteer, Yuki spat. We were sacrificed. Same thing. Ichiro's hand went to his belt, drew a bayonet that caught the moonlight. Before the Americans take what the government promised them, I'll reclaim what you stole. Japanese pride, Japanese dignity, starting with you. He looked at Emiko. Daniel fired, his first shot at a living human being. His finger trembled, and the bullet went wide, sparking off a tree trunk 6 feet from Ichiro's head. The sergeant barely flinched. He'd been shot at by people who actually wanted to kill him. Ichiro closed the distance between them in 3 strides. Faster than Daniel could work the bolt action. Faster than Hayes could swing the Thompson around without hitting the women. He tackled Daniel, driving him into the mud. The bayonet came up. Daniel saw his death in the blade's edge. Saw his mother getting a telegram. Saw his father's disappointed face one last time. Saw all the wheat fields of Kansas that he'd never see again. Then something dark and heavy swung through the air. Emiko hit Ichiro with a piece of burned tree branch. The impact was solid, meaty, the sound of wood on skull. Ichiro's eyes rolled back and he collapsed sideways, blood streaming from a gash above his ear. Emiko stood over him, the branch still raised, her whole body shaking. The field jacket had fallen from her shoulders. In the moonlight, in her torn kimono, with a weapon in her hands and death at her feet, she looked like something from a ghost story. Then she dropped the branch and was sick. Daniel scrambled to his feet, pulled her away from the body. You saved my life. I killed him. Her voice was hollow. I killed a person. I am murderer. He was going to kill me, then rape you. You're not a murderer. You're a survivor. Hayes checked Ichiro's pulse. He's still breathing. Skull fracture probably, but he'll live. He looked at Emiko with something like respect. You pulled that hit. You could have killed him, but you didn't. That takes control most soldiers don't have. Emiko was crying now. Not the overwhelmed tears from the chocolate. These were different. The tears of someone who had crossed a line they couldn't uncross, who had used violence and found it effective, and was horrified by how easy it had been. Yuki put an arm around her, spoke in Japanese. Emiko shook her head, but Yuki was insistent. Daniel didn't need translation to understand. This is what survival looks like. This is what they made us into. You did what you had to do. Sachiko had gone completely white. Is this what it feels like to be a soldier, to use violence? Yeah, Hayes said quietly, and it never stops feeling bad. Not ever, not even when it's justified, especially not when it's justified. They tied Ichiro's hands with strips of bandage from the medical supplies and left him propped against a tree. He'd wake up with the worst headache of his life and a reminder that mercy wasn't the same as weakness. Dawn came slowly painting the ruins in shades of gold and gray. They heard the convoy before they saw it, the rumble of heavy trucks, the professional efficiency of a military operation that knew what it was doing. 1st Cavalry Division sweeping through the occupation zone, securing routes, establishing order. The lead vehicle stopped when it saw them. 7 people who looked like they'd fought a war all by themselves. Hayes in his mud-caked uniform. Daniel with blood on his hands from wrestling with Ichiro. 3 Japanese women in torn kimonos. A little girl who'd somehow ended up with them. Captain Morris stepped out of the truck. He was 40, maybe 45, with the kind of face that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. Until he saw Emiko. Then his face went slack with shock. Emiko Tanaka. The way he said her name with recognition and disbelief stopped everyone cold. You know her, Hayes asked. I was military attaché in Tokyo, 38 to 41. Her father, Principal Tanaka, taught me Japanese, kept me from causing a dozen diplomatic disasters. Morris walked closer, staring at Emiko like she was a ghost. You used to sit in on our calligraphy lessons. You were what, 14, 15? 14, Emiko whispered. Morris looked at her torn clothes, at Daniel's field jacket lying in the mud, at the 3 women who were clearly from the comfort system. His jaw tightened. Corporal Hayes, what the hell is going on here? These women were under attack by Japanese bandits. We provided protective assistance. Protective assistance. Morris's voice was flat. Is that what we're calling it? Sir, they saved my life, Daniel said. Emiko killed a man to protect me. Private, you distributed military supplies to enemy nationals. You transported unauthorized civilians. You engaged in combat operations outside your designated patrol area. Morris ticked off the violations on his fingers. By regulation, I should put you in the stockade pending court-martial. He looked at Emiko again, at the girl who used to laugh at his terrible calligraphy, who used to correct his stroke order with patient hands, whose father had treated him with dignity when dignity was in short supply. Load them in the truck, Morris said. All of them. Medical evaluation, hot food, clean clothes. He turned to Daniel. Warren, you just violated every rule in the book. A pause that felt like it lasted forever. But you did the right thing. They helped the women into the truck. A medic brought blankets, clean water, the simple kindnesses of an army that had supplies to spare. Emiko stopped at the tailgate and turned back to Daniel. From her pocket, she pulled a scrap of paper, the back of a propaganda flyer. On it, drawn in charcoal, was a single cherry blossom. She pressed it into his hand. In Japan, cherry blossom blooms short time. Beautiful then gone, but seed remains in ground. Someday maybe bloom again. Her fingers lingered on his for just a moment. Then she was gone, climbing into the truck with the others. Daniel watched it pull away, the drawing clutched in his hand, and felt something shift in his chest. Something he didn't have words for yet. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of something larger. Hayes put a hand on his shoulder. You know, you'll probably never see her again. I know. You know she's going to processing, interrogation, repatriation. The system's going to swallow her up. I know. And you're still holding that drawing like it's made of gold. Daniel looked at the charcoal cherry blossom, at the delicate lines drawn by hands that had killed to protect him. Yeah, I am. In the distance, the truck disappeared into the morning haze. Somewhere in that convoy was a woman who spoke English and taught school and had survived things Daniel couldn't imagine, who had looked at him with hope instead of hatred, who had shown him that mercy wasn't weakness and kindness wasn't surrender. The shooting had stopped. But for Daniel Warren and Emiko Tanaka, the real battle was just beginning. The battle to believe in mercy when the world taught hatred, something that would take 22 years and an ocean of letters to understand. Something that started with chocolate and ended with a cherry tree planted in soil that had known too much blood. But that story belonged to the future. Right now, in the ruins of Chiba, on an August morning in 1945, there was only a boy with a drawing and a promise he didn't yet know he would keep. That someday, somehow he would see those cherry blossoms bloom again. The Yokohama civilian processing facility smelled like boiled cabbage and disinfectant. Emiko sat on a metal folding chair in a room painted institutional green and tried not to think about the warehouse cellar. Tried not to think about Ichiro's skull under her makeshift club. Tried not to think about Daniel Warren's face as the truck pulled away. She failed at all three. Across the desk sat Captain Sarah Brennan, a woman in her 30s with iron gray eyes and a manner that suggested she'd heard every story and believed none of them until proven otherwise. Behind her, a Japanese translator waited with a pad of paper, though Emiko had already explained she spoke English. "Let's start from the beginning," Brennan said. "How did you come to be at the recreation facility in Chiba?" Emiko told the story. Her father's death, her mother's radiation sickness, Takeshi starving, the government recruiter with his promises of ration cards in patriotic duty, the 12 women who became 3, the sealed medical crate with its terrible contents. She told it in a flat voice like she was reciting someone else's history. Brennan took notes without expression. When Emiko finished, the captain set down her pen and looked at her directly for the first time. "You understand, we're documenting war crimes. The comfort system was systematic sexual slavery. Your testimony could help prosecute those responsible. Will it bring back my father, heal my mother, give me back the last 4 years?" Emiko shook her head. "I just want to find my brother. Go home. Live." "We'll help you locate your family," Brennan said. "But first I need to know about the American soldiers. Private Warren and Corporal Hayes, did they assault you in any way?" Emiko looked at her steadily. "Private Warren gave me chocolate. Corporal Hayes gave me water. They saved our lives from Japanese men who would have raped and killed us. They protected us when our own people hunted us like animals. They treated us like human beings when everyone else treated us like weapons or shields or shame." Her voice hardened. "No, they did not assault us. They showed us what mercy looks like. His name is Daniel Warren, from Kansas, and I owe him my life." Brennan made a note. "Kansas. Did he tell you anything else about himself?" "He reads poetry. He was scared. He had never killed anyone. He gave chocolate to a child before he gave it to a woman." Emiko's throat tightened. "He saw us as people, not enemies, not comfort women. People." The interview lasted 2 more hours. Questions about the facility, about the matron who fled, about the supplies, about Kenji and his men. Emiko answered everything truthfully. She had nothing left to hide and nothing left to lose. When it was over, Brennan walked her to the door. "We found your brother. Takeshi is alive. He's at an orphanage in Osaka. We're arranging transport." Emiko's knees went weak. "He's alive. 42 kilograms now, still thin but eating. Red Cross has been feeding the orphanages." Brennan's expression softened slightly. "It'll take a few weeks to process the paperwork, but you'll be reunited. And Miss Tanaka, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. For what was done to you. By your government and mine. You deserve better." That night, Emiko lay on a cot in a barracks with 200 other displaced women and stared at the ceiling. Yuki was 2 cots over, already asleep or pretending to be. Sachiko was at the far end teaching a group of orphan children how to fold paper cranes, finding purpose in small beauties. Emiko pulled Daniel's field jacket from under her pillow. She'd refused to give it up when they issued her clean clothes. The wool still smelled like tobacco and wheat and something else. Safety, maybe. Or the memory of it. She pressed her face into the fabric and let herself cry for the first time since the warehouse. Not tears of fear or pain. Tears of release. Of survival. Of the crushing weight of gratitude for a boy she'd known for 6 hours and would probably never see again. 300 miles south, Daniel Warren stood in the ruins of Hiroshima and tried to comprehend hell. The city wasn't a city anymore. It was a scar, a shadow, a place where the normal rules of physics and mortality had been suspended for one terrible instant and then reimposed with compound interest. Daniel's engineering unit had been assigned to help build temporary housing. Every day he saw the cost of total war. Children with keloid scars that covered half their faces. Old men coughing blood from lungs that had been cooked from the inside. Women who'd lost entire families in a flash of light hotter than the sun. At night, he couldn't sleep. He'd lie in his tent with the cherry blossom drawing tucked into his shirt pocket and try to reconcile what he'd been told with what he'd seen. The Japanese were supposed to be fanatics, monsters, less than human. But every face he saw in Hiroshima looked like Emiko's face. Scared, hurt, human. Hayes found him on the third week sitting alone behind the supply depot with his head in his hands. "You okay, kid?" "I don't know what okay means anymore," Daniel said. "We did this. We dropped a bomb that killed 80,000 people in an instant. And I'm supposed to what? Feel good about it because it ended the war, build houses for the survivors, and pretend that makes it even." Hayes sat down beside him. "It doesn't make it even. Nothing makes it even. War doesn't have an even. It just has an after." He pulled out a cigarette, offered one to Daniel. "I got a letter today from my sister. She wants to know if I'm coming home a hero." "What did you tell her?" "Haven't written back yet. Don't know what to say. I killed 3 nurses on Iwo Jima. Nurses Warren, women with bandages. And for what? Because I was scared. Because I'd been told they might be dangerous. Because it was easier to pull a trigger than take a risk." Hayes lit both cigarettes. "Then I watched you give chocolate to a kid and soap to bandits, and I realized I'd spent the whole war being exactly what they told me to be. A killer. You spent 6 hours being what they told you not to be. Human." "I'm not a hero, Hayes. Neither am I, but maybe we don't have to be heroes. Maybe we just have to be better than what the war wanted us to be." Daniel pulled out the cherry blossom drawing, showed it to Hayes. "She drew this for me. You kept it for 3 weeks. That's not just gratitude, Warren. That's something else. I have to know she's okay. I have to know Takeshi found her. That they're safe. Then write her a letter. Care of Yokohama Processing. Worst case, it comes back undeliverable. Best case," Hayes stood up, dusting ash from his uniform. "Best case, you get to tell her she changed your life. That's worth something." Daniel wrote the letter that night by flashlight in his tent. He rewrote it 4 times, each version worse than the last. How did you tell someone they'd made you question everything? That saving them had saved you in some fundamental way? That chocolate and cherry blossoms had broken through propaganda so thick you'd thought it was reality? In the end, he kept it simple. "Dear Emiko, I don't know if this letter will reach you. I don't know where you are or if you're safe, but I needed to write because I keep thinking about that morning in Chiba. About chocolate and soap and the way you looked at me like maybe I wasn't a monster. I'm in Hiroshima now, seeing what we did, what my country did, and I keep wondering how we got here, how we convinced ourselves that entire cities of people were acceptable losses, how propaganda on both sides turned humans into enemies. You asked me why I helped you. The truth is you helped me. You showed me that the enemy isn't the person on the other side. It's the lie that says there has to be sides at all. I hope you found Takeshi. I hope you're somewhere safe. I hope someday the cherry blossoms bloom again like you said. I'm keeping your drawing. It reminds me that beautiful things can grow in ashes. Maybe we both can. Yours, Daniel Warren." He mailed it with no real expectation of response. Military mail to civilian processing centers was irregular at best. She might not even be there anymore. Might have been repatriated already. Might want nothing to do with the American soldier who'd seen her at her most vulnerable. The letter reached Emiko 6 weeks later, forwarded through 3 different administrative offices. She was in Osaka by then, reunited with Takeshi in a 2-room apartment they shared with Yuki and her aunt. Sachiko had found work teaching Ikebana to war widows, helping them find beauty in a world that had tried to destroy it. Emiko read Daniel's letter 7 times before she let herself believe it was real. Then she borrowed paper from Yuki's aunt and wrote back. October 1945. Daniel had 48 hours before his discharge papers processed. 48 hours before he'd board a ship back to Kansas and never see Japan again. The letter from Emiko had arrived that morning, forwarded through Red Cross channels. She was alive. She was in Yokohama. She was 200 miles away. He stole a jeep at 0300 hours. Hayes covered for him, told the duty officer Warren was on latrine detail. The drive through occupied Japan was surreal. American checkpoints every 20 miles. Japanese civilians bowing as military vehicles passed. The smell of reconstruction of a nation trying to rebuild from atomic ash. The Yokohama Processing Center gate guard was a sergeant from Tennessee who looked at Daniel's mud-splattered uniform and raised an eyebrow. "You got authorization to be here, Private?" "I need to see Emiko Tanaka. She's a civilian processor. I saved her life in Chiba. I just need 5 minutes to know she's okay." The sergeant looked at him for a long moment. Then his expression softened. "You're the kid with the chocolate bar. She told that story to everyone here. Made half the secretaries cry." He jerked his thumb toward the back gate. 5 minutes, back entrance. "If anyone asks, I never saw you." Emiko emerged from the barracks in clean clothes that didn't fit right, her hair still damp from washing. When she saw Daniel, she stopped breathing. They stood 10 feet apart. Daniel wanted to close the distance, wanted to hold her, wanted to promise her everything would be okay. But he knew better. He was going home. She was rebuilding here. The ocean between Kansas and Osaka might as well have been the moon. "I had to see you," he said, "before I left. I had to know you were safe. You came." Her English was better already. "You risk punishment. For me. You killed a man to save me. This seemed like the least I could do." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the torn chocolate wrapper. "I keep this. Remind me that kindness exists." Daniel pulled out her cherry blossom drawing. "I keep this. Reminds me that beautiful things survive." They stood in silence for what felt like hours but was probably seconds. Then Emiko spoke quietly. "Daniel Warren from Kansas. When you go home, will you write to me? Tell me about wheat fields, about America that is not war. If you write back, tell me about Japan that is not burning. I will write, I promise." She gave him an address. He memorized it. Then she did something that made his breath catch. She stepped forward and placed her hand over his heart, just for a moment, feeling it beat. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for being human when world was not." Then she was gone, back into the barracks. Daniel stood in the darkness of occupied Japan and knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't goodbye. It was the beginning of something that would take decades to understand. He made it back to base before dawn. Hayes was waiting. "You're an idiot, Warren. I know. But you got your answer." "Yeah, I did." The correspondence began slowly. One letter every month or two. Daniel told her about Kansas, about wheat fields that stretched to the horizon, about his father who thought him too soft and his sister who thought him too serious, about how he'd started reading Whitman again and finding new meanings in old words. Emiko told him about rebuilding, about teaching English at a community center for women who wanted to work with the occupation forces, about Takeshi slowly gaining weight, slowly smiling again, about nightmares that came less frequently but never fully stopped, about Kenji Masuda who'd opened a small school and sent her a note of apology written in beautiful calligraphy. The letters became more frequent, more personal. By 1948, they were writing every 2 weeks. By 1950, every week. Daniel told her about Sally Mae, the girl from church his father kept pushing him toward, how he tried to court her properly, taken her to dances, bought her flowers, proposed because it seemed like what he was supposed to do, married her in a ceremony that felt like play acting. "I don't love her," he wrote in 1952. "God help me, I tried. But she's not you. No one is you. We have 2 children now, and I'm a father who can't love their mother, and I don't know how to fix it." Emiko wrote back about the Japanese men who courted her. Earnest salarymen and teachers and businessmen rebuilding their lives. Good men, honest men, men who would make fine husbands. "I can't marry them," she wrote. "They look at me and see comfort woman, see shame, see damaged goods. Only you ever looked at me and saw just Emiko, The devil with kind eyes ruined me for Japanese men. In 1963, Sally Mae found the letters. All of them. 11 years of correspondence hidden in Daniel's desk drawer. She read them while he was at school teaching English to teenagers who thought Whitman was boring. He came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table with the letters spread out like evidence. "You're in love with her," Sally Mae said. Not a question. Daniel couldn't lie anymore. "Yes. You never loved me." "I tried. I wanted to. You're a good person, Sally. You deserve someone who could love you properly." "But that someone wasn't you." She wasn't crying. That somehow made it worse. "How long are you going to tie half a life, Daniel? How long are you going to pretend?" The divorce took 6 months. Sally Mae got the house and custody of the children. Daniel got the farm and the weight of his choices. He wrote to Emiko about it, expected judgment or pity, got understanding instead. "We both chose duty over heart," she wrote back. "You married the appropriate girl. I stayed single rather than marry someone who couldn't see me. Maybe we were both cowards. Or maybe we were both just trying to survive in a world that didn't have space for what we felt." The years between 1963 and 1967 were the loneliest of Daniel's life. The divorce had freed him from pretense but trapped him in solitude. He taught his classes. He read Whitman to students who didn't care. He wrote to Emiko every Wednesday without fail. Her letters were his only anchor. She told him about Takeshi's wedding, about becoming an aunt, about her promotion to full professor, about the night she wore his field jacket and imagined what Kansas wheat fields smelled like in summer. "We have lived 18 years on paper," she wrote in 1963. "Sometimes I wonder if we are real to each other or just beautiful fiction we invented to survive the war." That question haunted Daniel. What if they met again and discovered the people in their letters were ghosts? What if 22 years had turned mercy into mythology? Then the invitation arrived. Tokyo Reconciliation Conference, and her name in the presenter list. And suddenly the question wasn't, what if we meet again, but how fast can I book a flight? In August 1967, Daniel received a letter that was different from all the others. Official letterhead, Tokyo Reconciliation Conference. An invitation to speak as a veteran who had shown mercy during the occupation. Transportation provided, accommodations arranged. And in a postscript that made his heart race, Professor Emiko Tanaka will be presenting on the Comfort Women's System and its aftermath. He booked the flight before he could talk himself out of it. The conference was held at the Tokyo International Forum, a massive building that hadn't existed when Daniel was last in Japan. He arrived 3 days early, too nervous to wait until the last minute. Hayes came with him, retired now, and living in California, still carrying the weight of Iwo Jima, but lighter than he'd been. "You ready for this?" Hayes asked as they registered at the hotel. "I haven't seen her in 22 years. I don't even know if she'll recognize me." "Warren, you've been writing to each other every week for 2 decades. She'll recognize you." The first day of the conference, Daniel sat in the back of the auditorium through presentations on war crimes and reconciliation in the long shadow of trauma. He kept scanning the crowd for a face he'd seen once for 6 hours and had been carrying in his memory ever since. Then she was there, on stage, 43 years old with gray streaking through her dark hair, wearing a formal kimono, speaking in fluent English to 300 people about what it meant to survive when survival was supposed to be impossible. "I was told Americans were demons," Emiko said, her voice carrying through the auditorium. "Blue-eyed monsters who would feast on our flesh. Barbarians who knew nothing of civilization or mercy." And then a 19-year-old boy with a chocolate bar proved that propaganda is the most dangerous weapon of any war. Daniel's breath caught. He didn't have to help us. He could have walked away. His own corporal told him to, but he saw 3 women in danger and he chose humanity over orders. He gave us chocolate when we expected violence, soap when we expected shame, protection when we expected to be abandoned. She paused. "I never saw him again, but I wrote him letters for 22 years, and he wrote back. And through those letters, we proved that enemies are made by fear, not birth." The presentation ended to sustained applause. Emiko bowed and left the stage. Daniel sat frozen, unable to move, unable to process that she'd just told their story to hundreds of people. Hayes elbowed at him. "Go, you idiot! Don't let her leave!" Daniel pushed through the crowd toward the stage exit. His heart was hammering so hard he could barely breathe. 22 years, an ocean of letters, A connection built entirely on paper and memory, and the stubborn refusal to let go of something that had bloomed in ashes. He saw her in the hallway. She was talking to a conference organizer, her back to him. For a moment he couldn't speak, couldn't move. What if the woman in his letters was different from the woman standing 10 feet away? What if 22 years had changed them both too much? Then he said her name. Emiko. She turned. Their eyes met, and Daniel saw the exact moment recognition hit. The way her expression shifted from polite attention to shock, to something that looked like what and grief tangled together. Daniel-san, she whispered. They stood 3 feet apart in a hallway full of people, and Daniel felt like he was 19 again, in a burned forest offering chocolate to someone who'd been taught to fear him. Except now they were both middle-aged, both carrying the weight of choices made and roads not taken, both wondering if it was possible to bridge 22 years with anything other than words on paper. I kept your drawing, he said, in my wallet, every day for 22 years. I kept your jacket, wore it every winter, smells like wheat, like Kansas, like mercy. Neither of them moved closer. They just looked, really looked, learning the lines that time had added to each other's faces, the gray in the hair, the weight of years lived separately but somehow together. I got divorced, Daniel said. Baki, 3 years ago, I couldn't love anyone else. You set a standard. I never married. Japanese men see comfort, woman, when they look at me. You saw Emiko. No one else could match that. A young man approached, tall, early 30s with Emiko's eyes. Sister, they want you for the panel discussion in 10 minutes. Emiko gestured at him. Daniel, this is Takeshi, my brother. You saved his life by saving mine. Takeshi bowed deeply. When he straightened, there were tears in his eyes. My sister has told me about you my entire adult life. The American who gave her chocolate, who showed her kindness when the world showed only cruelty. Our family owes you everything. Behind Takeshi, 3 children peered around their father's legs. A girl about 8, eyes wide with curiosity. This is my eldest Emiko, Takeshi said, gesturing to the girl, named for my sister, who is alive because of you. The little girl stepped forward. Uncle Daniel, Auntie says you gave her chocolate when she was hungry. Was it good? Daniel knelt down to her level. Ask her. The girl looked up at her aunt. Emiko smiled. Best chocolate in the world, because it came with kindness. The panel discussion started without Emiko. They sat in that hallway for an hour talking, not about the war or the letters or the 22 years between then and now. Just talking. About Takeshi's family, about Daniel's children who were grown now, understanding why their father had seemed so distant with their mother, about Yuki's work at the UN, about Sachiko's Ikebana school, about small, ordinary things that felt miraculous because they were sharing them in person instead of on paper. Hayes found them eventually. Warren, you're supposed to give your presentation in 20 minutes. I know. You planning to show up? Eventually? Daniel looked at Emiko. Will you still be here tomorrow? I live in Osaka, 2 hours by train. Can I see you after the conference? I have 3 days before I fly back to Kansas. Yes, she said simply. They spent those 3 days walking through Tokyo, eating at restaurants where Emiko translated menus and Daniel made terrible attempts at Japanese pronunciation that made her laugh, visiting temples where they lit incense for their dead, sitting in parks and talking about everything and nothing. On the last night, they stood at the train station where Emiko would catch the express back to Osaka. Daniel would fly out the next morning. Come to Kansas, he said. See the wheat fields. Meet my students. See what you've been reading about for 20 years. I have my life here, my job, Takeshi, my students. I know, I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to visit, to see if what we built in letters can exist in the real world. Emiko was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. I've been carrying this for 3 days, debating whether to give it to you. Inside was a letter of acceptance. Visiting professor position at the University of Kansas. Teaching Japanese language and culture. 1-year appointment starting in 1970. I applied 6 months ago, she said. Before I knew you'd be at the conference. Before I knew if I'd ever see you again. I just needed to know if the place you described in your letters was real. if Kansas wheat fields actually exist, or if they were just a dream you were selling me. Daniel started laughing, couldn't help it. 22 years of careful distance, and they'd both been moving toward the same point without telling each other. The wheat fields are real, Kian, he said, and if you come to Kansas, I promise you'll see them. Just see them. Well, I have a farmhouse that's too big for one person, and a barn where I still read Whitman, and a whole lifetime of talking I'd like to do in person instead of on paper. The train was boarding, last call for Osaka. Emiko looked at the platform, then at Daniel. Made a choice that had been 22 years in the making. I'll come in 1970 for 1 year. Just 1 year. We'll see if you can stand me in person for that long. She got on the train. Daniel watched it pull away, the same hollow feeling he had had in 1945 when the truck took her to processing. Except this time it came with something else. Hope, certainty, the knowledge that this wasn't an ending. Emiko arrived in Kansas in January 1970. Daniel picked her up from the airport in a truck that had replaced the old Jeep but smelled the same. Wheat and motor oil and home. He drove her through snow-covered fields to the farmhouse, showed her the barn, the room where she'd stay if she wanted privacy, or the master bedroom if she didn't. They were married in June. A quiet ceremony in the local church with Takeshi and his family flown in from Japan. Hayes, his best man, still carrying Tommy's photograph. Yuki crying in the front row. Sachiko arranging the flowers, making sure every bloom was perfect. For their honeymoon, Daniel took Emiko to every wheat field within 50 miles. Let her run her hands through the grain. Taught her the smell of Kansas summer. Showed her that some promises, even ones that take 25 years to fulfill, are worth keeping. They lived between two worlds. Summers in Kansas, winters in Osaka. Teaching at universities on both continents. Writing a book together about their experience. About how propaganda works and how it fails. About the stubborn resistance of human connection in the face of systematic dehumanization. In August 1995, they returned to Chiba for the 50th anniversary of the war's end. The warehouse where they met was gone, replaced by a small park. A memorial stone marked the spot. Here, enemies became human. The ceremony was attended by hundreds, veterans from both sides, survivors of the comfort system, children and grandchildren who'd grown up hearing the stories. Kenji Matsuda was there, 88 years old and walking with a cane. Haruka, his daughter, had become a doctor, specialized in treating radiation victims. The American boy gave me chocolate when I was starving, Haruka told the crowd. Changed everything. Made me believe in kindness when the world had none. I became a doctor because someone showed mercy when they could have shown cruelty. Hayes came wheelchair-bound now, but still sharp. He placed Tommy Rodriguez's photograph at the memorial. I'm sorry, brother. Warren showed me how to do better. I hope you forgive me. Yuki spoke about her years at the UN, about dedicating her life to refugee advocacy because 2 soldiers had refused to leave 3 women behind. Sachiko brought her students dozens of women learning ekabana, learning that beauty grows anywhere, even in grief. The ceremony ended with the tree planting. But this wasn't a simple ceremonial gesture. This was 300 people, hands on the same shovel, taking turns moving earth that had soaked up blood and ash and propaganda. Daniel and Emiko went first. Their hands overlapped on the wooden handle. 70 and 71 years old bodies bent by time, but spirits unbroken. They lifted the first shovelful of soil together. Then Hayes' wheelchair bound his hands, shaking with Parkinson's. He managed 1 scoop before breaking down. Tommy, I hope you see this. I hope you know I finally learned. Yuki came next, 69, but still fierce. She planted the tree with the same hands that had offered Hayes a cigarette in 1945. For every woman who didn't survive to see this day. Sachiko's students, dozens of women into traditional dress, each adding a handful of soil while reciting haiku about renewal. Kenji and Haruka together, father and daughter who'd learned mercy from an enemy. For every teacher who forgot they were supposed to teach kindness. Takeshi's children, the next generation, planting seeds of peace in the soil that had grown only hatred. As the last of the soil was placed, Daniel felt Emiko's hand find his. She squeezed. He squeezed back. 50 years of distance collapsed into that single touch. The tree was small, fragile. It might not survive the winter, but it was alive. And it was trying, just like all of them had tried in August 1945 when choosing mercy seemed impossible. Someone started singing, a Japanese folk song about cherry blossoms. Then an American voice joined in singing Amazing Grace. Two melodies, two languages, harmonizing in ways that shouldn't work but did. And in that moment, standing in Chiba with 300 people from two nations who tried to destroy each other, Daniel Warren understood what victory really meant. Not the surrender signed on the Missouri, but this. Former enemies singing together over a tree planted in forgiveness. They buried something beneath the tree's roots. Daniel's original Hershey wrapper preserved in plastic for 50 years. A bar of soap from the medical crate. Emiko's charcoal drawing of a cherry blossom. Tangible proof that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness reshape entire lives. Daniel gave the closing speech. 70 years old now, still teaching, still reading Whitman to students who thought him too sentimental. People ask what I did in the war. I tell them I didn't fight it. I ended it. Not with bullets or bombs, with chocolate and soap and the courage to see a human being instead of a headline. 3 women, 1 candy bar, and the radical belief that enemies are made by fear, not birth. Emiko added her piece standing beside him, like she'd been doing for 25 years. My husband gave me chocolate, but more than that, he gave me dignity when I had none left. He treated me as human when my own people saw me as sacrifice. War teaches us to see enemies. Peace teaches us to see each other. We chose to see each other, and look what grew. She gestured at the cherry tree, at the crowd of people from 2 nations gathered in friendship, at the children playing together, American and Japanese, unaware that their grandparents had once been told to hate each other. The camera pulled back, overhead shot of the memorial park, the sapling cherry tree in the center, concentric circles of people, all ages, all nationalities, American and Japanese flags side by side, cherry blossoms from older trees falling like snow. On the memorial stone, an inscription in English and Japanese, "Here, August 24th, 1945, enemies became human. Here, chocolate defeated propaganda. Here, mercy won the war that bombs could not." Daniel's final voiceover spoken over images of the tree through the seasons, winter bare, spring blooming, summer full, autumn fading. The war ended with signatures on the USS Missouri. But the peace began in a warehouse cellar with a terrified girl and a scared boy who chose kindness over orders. We're both old now. We've lived a life together that started with 6 hours and 22 years of letters. And every spring when the cherry blossoms bloom, I see her face in 1945. I see mercy defeating fear. I see the seed we planted together. Emiko's voice joined his for the last line. Monsters are made by fear. Humans are made by mercy. We chose mercy. And the cherry blossoms are still blooming. The final image held, the tree in full bloom, petals falling across the memorial stone. An American flag and Japanese flag tied together with a ribbon blowing in the wind. The ghost of a boy with chocolate and a girl with nothing left to lose visible for just a moment in the dabbled light beneath the branches. Then fade to black. White text on black, Daniel Warren, 1926 to 2012. Emiko Tanaka Warren, 1924 to 2018. Married, 1970. Inseparable until the end. Their memorial fund has provided scholarships to 500 students studying peace and reconciliation. The cherry tree in Chiba still blooms every spring. Final title card, subscribe for more untold stories of the greatest generation. Share this with a veteran. Comment. What lie were you told about an enemy?